I miss you.
You look great. You look
I
fantastic.
look like Prince.
No one saw it coming. Behind Sandra Bullock's radiant smile, beneath the applause and glittering awards, there was a silence so deafening it could shatter the soul. She was Hollywood's golden girl, charming, witty, adored. But even the brightest lights cast the darkest shadows. In the midst of her greatest triumphs, Sandra Bullock was quietly unraveling, piece by piece. What could possibly drive one of the most beloved actresses of our generation into seclusion? What truth was too painful for her to share with the world? This isn't the story of a star's fall from grace. It's the story of a woman who bore unimaginable pain in silence. Sandra Annette Bullock was born on the 26th of July, 1964, in Arlington, Virginia. Her father, John Bullock, was a U.S. Army employee and voice coach. Her mother, Helga Meyer, was a German opera singer with a commanding presence. For most, this might sound like the beginning of a privileged life. But the truth was far more complex and far more painful. Sandra spent much of her early childhood in Nuremberg, Germany, trailing her mother from one opera house to another. While other children played in parks and watched cartoons, Sandra sat backstage in cold theaters, learning to be silent, still, invisible. Her lullabies were arias. Her nursery rhymes were echoes of applause. But applause was not affection, and music was not love. Helga Meyer was strict, demanding, and distant. She trained Sandra like a performer, not like a daughter. There was no room for mistakes, no space for emotions. Sandra once said, "My mother wasn't mean, she was just steel." And I always felt like I was trying to earn her. Back in America, Sandra was the awkward girl with a German accent and strange clothes. She was bullied for being different. Her classmates mocked her voice. She was labeled a weirdo. In middle school, she ate lunch alone, sketching imaginary friends in the margins of her notebooks. One day, after another lunchroom humiliation, she came home, looked into the mirror, and whispered to herself, "You'll never let them see you cry again." That promise became her armor. But what no one knew was that Sandra had already learned how to perform not just on stage, but in life. Every smile she gave was carefully rehearsed. Every joke, every giggle, was a way to hide the fear of never being enough. Behind the curtains of elegance and talent, a lonely girl waited for someone, anyone, to see her. Sandra Bullock didn't stumble into Hollywood. She clawed her way in quietly, stubbornly, with more rejection letters than callbacks. In her early 20s, she moved to New York City with nothing but a suitcase and a stubborn belief that she could make it. She waited tables, worked coat checks, and slept on a mattress on the floor of a cramped apartment. Her neighbors partied. She practiced monologues. Her friends gave up. She stayed. The first auditions were humiliating. One casting director told her, "You're cute, but not in the way that sells." Another suggested she get a nose job, change her name, and try again next year. But she didn't break. Not then. She failed the first time, then the second, then the third. She got tiny roles in off-Broadway plays, then a commercial for hemorrhoid cream. She hated it, but she smiled, and she kept going. Her break finally came not with a bang, but with a whisper. A small role in a forgotten television movie caught the eye of a producer. That led to another job, then another, and then Speed. The 1994 action thriller changed everything. Suddenly, the girl who once ate lunch alone was America's sweetheart, but no one saw what it cost her. Sandra was terrified. The fame came too fast, the pressure too sharp. Every red carpet felt like a battlefield. Every review was a potential wound. Her private life became public property. Paparazzi hounded her, even in moments of grief. And inside, she still felt like that awkward girl being told she wasn't enough. There were nights she sat alone in luxury hotel rooms, wondering if she had made a mistake. Success had arrived, but peace had not. And yet, she didn't stop. She worked harder, smiled wider, hid deeper. Sandra Bullock had finally arrived in Hollywood. But it wasn't a dream. It was a tightrope walk between fame and fear. By the late 1990 seconds, Sandra Bullock was unstoppable. From Miss Congeniality to While You Were Sleeping, she wasn't just acting, she was shaping a generation's idea of charm, grit, and grace. Every role she touched turned to gold. Studios fought over her. Directors praised her work ethic. Fans adored her warmth. She was Hollywood royalty, America's sweetheart, a bankable name, a billion-dollar face. But behind the glamour, Sandra Bullock was exhausted. Her schedule was punishing 16-hour days, back-to-back shoots, constant interviews, red carpets in different time zones. The more the world demanded of her, the more she gave, until there was nothing left to give. She began to lose track of birthdays, friendships, time. Some friends drifted, others were pushed away. Loneliness became a constant companion, hiding behind public laughter. When she wasn't filming, she was recovering from stress, insomnia, and anxiety. One close friend once said, "Sandra doesn't rest, she disappears." In 2010, she reached what many would call the peak, an Academy Award for The Blind Side. On that stage, with the Oscar in her hand, she smiled through tears. It was the moment every actor dreams of. But that very night, her world was already collapsing. The headlines would come days later: betrayal, scandal, public humiliation. While the world celebrated her victory, she was quietly preparing for a heartbreak no camera would ever fully capture. Sandra Bullock had everything: fame, money, recognition, but peace? Peace had always been out of reach. She was adored by millions, but the price of that love was unbearable isolation. March 2010. Sandra Bullock had just won the Oscar for The Blind Side, a role that showcased not just her acting, but her soul. The world applauded. The cameras flashed. She smiled, holding the golden statue like a promise. Then, the headlines exploded. Just days after her career-defining moment, the tabloids revealed that her husband, Jesse James, had been unfaithful with multiple women. The betrayal was public, brutal, and merciless. Sandra, who had just thanked him in her acceptance speech, suddenly became the centerpiece of a humiliation watched by millions. But she didn't lash out. She didn't cry for sympathy. She vanished. While the media feasted on the scandal, Sandra disappeared from Hollywood. She canceled all appearances. She went silent. Not even her closest friends knew where she was. For weeks, she hid not out of shame, but from heartbreak so profound it left her paralyzed. Behind closed doors, she filed for divorce. At the same time, she was quietly completing the adoption of her first child, a baby boy named Louis. She had started the process in secret, months before the Oscar win, hoping to raise him with the man she once trusted. Now, she would do it alone. She once said, "You think you know pain? Try explaining to a newborn why you cry every night." Sandra had survived rejection, loneliness, and fame. But betrayal, that was the wound that nearly broke her. For the first time in her life, she considered quitting Hollywood entirely, walking away, letting it all go. She had given everything, and in return, she was left with silence, scandal, and a shattered heart. Yet somehow, even in that darkness, she held on. Not for the cameras, not for the fans, but for a boy who knew nothing of betrayal, only love. After the scandal, after the silence, after the heartbreak, something shifted in Sandra Bullock. She returned, but not to the same spotlight. Not with the same hunger, Hollywood still called, but she answered on her own terms. Her focus was no longer awards or applause. It was Louis. Becoming a mother changed everything. In interviews, she spoke less about scripts and more about school lunches, bedtime stories, and the sacred quiet of watching her son sleep. "The only man who's ever truly had my heart," she once said, "is 3 feet tall and calls me Mom." She adopted a second child, a daughter named Lila. Sandra, who had once longed for unconditional love, was now building a home filled with it. She stepped back from film after 2018, choosing privacy over prestige, parenting over premieres. She supported charities quietly. She donated millions to disaster relief, children's hospitals, and education initiatives, never seeking headlines for it. When praised, she simply shrugged. If you have more than you need, you share it. That's not heroic, that's human. Her worldview evolved. The woman who once lived under pressure to be perfect now embraced imperfection with grace. She spoke of boundaries, of healing, of knowing when to walk away not in fear, but in peace. And when her longtime partner Brian Randall, a quiet, grounding presence in her life, was diagnosed with ALS, Sandra chose silence once more, not from shame, but to protect him. For 3 years, she cared for him in private, away from the cameras, until his passing in 2023. Most of the world never knew he was sick. She bore it the way she always had, quietly, with strength born from sorrow. But this time, she wasn't alone. She had her children, her chosen family, and perhaps, finally, the love she'd been chasing her entire life. Once, Sandra Bullock learned how to perform silence backstage as a little girl, alone in a theater filled with shadows. Now, she chooses it. Not out of fear, but out of peace. She doesn't need the world to watch her anymore. She doesn't need headlines, red carpets, or applause to feel worthy. Because the most beautiful parts of her life, the late-night whispers with her children, the quiet resilience beside a dying partner, the healing she did without witnesses, happened far away from Hollywood's spotlight. Sandra Bullock's story is not about tragedy, it's about transformation. She walked through betrayal, heartbreak, and loss. And somehow, she emerged not hardened, but softer, wiser, more whole. And maybe that's the true power of a star. Not how brightly she shines, but how bravely she dims the light to find her soul. So, if her journey moved you, not the films, not the fame, but the woman behind it all, leave a word of thanks for the strength she never flaunted and the battles she never asked credit for. Because sometimes the strongest collapse in silence and rise again in grace.